Oui, Madame la Présidente, merci. Ce débat spécial sur l'intégration dans des sociétés diversifiées me paraît essentiel. Il nous rappelle que la dimension humaine est un volet majeur dans les engagements pris par les États participants à l'OSCE. Cette dimension humaine a un champ d'application très large. La protection des minorités nationales est une composante majeure, de même que toute question d'ordre humanitaire connexe. À Istanbul, nous avons voté une résolution qui loue la richesse et la diversité qui existent dans les 57 États participants de l'OSCE. Les migrants apportent une contribution positive à l'enrichissement culturel de nos sociétés. Mais nous avons fait aussi part de nos préoccupations. La montée du nationalisme et du racisme, de l'extrémisme et du populisme dans les vies politiques nous inquiète à juste titre. Elle résulte très largement de la récession économique et du chômage élevé. La situation économique très difficile peut dangereusement diffuser dans nos sociétés des réflexes d'intolérance et de discrimination à l'égard d'immigrants. Dans ma région, nous avons connu dans les années 30-35 des villages de 5000 habitants où il y avait 34 nationalités qui cohabitaient sans difficulté. Et aujourd'hui, nous avons des difficultés parce qu'il y a des situations économiques particulièrement difficiles. Il est plus facile, certes, de rejeter les difficultés sur l'autre et de se trouver facilement un bouc émissaire que de rechercher et surtout de trouver des solutions et de mettre en œuvre des actions de justice sociale. L'étranger, celui qui est différent, est une réponse facile, toute trouvée et parfois même lâche à nos préoccupations et à nos problèmes de vie quotidienne. Souvent même, il y a concurrence pour la survie sociale et économique à travers l'emploi, le logement, prioritairement avec le droit à l'éducation et à la santé. Ce qui est terrifiant, c'est qu'on oppose des pauvres à des plus pauvres et des plus précaires encore. Certains proposent des solutions simplistes et populistes. Éliminer celui qui est présenté comme un concurrent, un adversaire, voire même parfois un ennemi. C'est intolérable. Il y a là une menace réelle et permanente pour les droits fondamentaux et les valeurs démocratiques. C'est la sécurité et la stabilité des pays de l'OSCE qui sont en cause. Nous devons donc agir avec détermination. La déclaration d'Astana a réaffirmé les engagements pris en matière de dimension humaine. Elle souligne également que le respect des droits de l'homme ne relève pas exclusivement des affaires intérieures des États participants de l'OSCE. C'est essentiel. Tout cela montre à l'évidence que l'intégration passe par la mobilisation de tous dans nos États, mais aussi par le renforcement de la coopération mutuelle. L'OSCE peut et doit apporter une contribution essentielle. Il est urgent d'agir dans ce sens. Merci.
Muchas gracias, señor Neri. Tiene la palabra la señora Nassar de Rumanía y se prepara la señora Porina de Latvia.
Merci Madame la Présidente. Chers collègues, je suis ravie d'être avec vous aujourd'hui à explorer ensemble de meilleures façons de promouvoir l'intégration des sociétés diversifiées dans notre effort commun de renforcer la stabilité et la sécurité dans l'espace de l'OSCE. Nos sociétés se caractérisent par leur diversité à tous les niveaux culturels, ethniques et religieux, où les notions de respect des différentes identités et l'encouragement de la cohésion sociale sont essentielles. Une intégration réussie et la cohésion sociale dépendent de la reconnaissance universelle des droits de l'homme comme la base de la valeur courante dans les sociétés démocratiques. Le principe d'utilisation égale du droit de la liberté de pensée, de conscience et de religion est reconnu comme essentiel dans le contexte d'une société démocratique comme la nôtre, qui rassemble des personnes de différentes croyances et religions. Le Conseil multiculturel de la société, défini par des vues telles que l'intégration sociale, l'égalité des citoyens, le respect des différences culturelles et l'interdiction de la discrimination des immigrants, dans toutes ses formes, est nécessaire dans une société démocratique. La mise en œuvre du Conseil multiculturel a l'avantage d'éviter les conflits sociaux et ethniques, d'équilibrer les chances sociales de la société d'accueil et des immigrants en les offrant la chance de conserver leur culture bien différente de la culture de la majorité. De nombreuses sociétés ont connu des conflits, parfois violents, entre des personnes appartenant à différentes identités. Par conséquent, il est important que la protection des droits de l'homme soit entièrement liée à la préservation de la paix et de la stabilité à l'intérieur et entre les États. Permettez-moi de profiter de cette occasion pour porter à votre connaissance les récentes activités relativement à l'OSCE menées dans le Parlement roumain. Tout d'abord, je tiens à mentionner la conférence sur la médiation dans la région de l'OSCE qui a été organisée le juillet dernier au Palais du Parlement à Bucarest en coopération avec le Centre de prévention des conflits de l'OSCE. Ensuite, je voudrais faire référence à la visite de Mme Maria Grazia Gianmarinaro, la représentante spéciale de l'OSCE pour la lutte contre la traite des êtres humains, à la Chambre des députés au début du mois de septembre 2013. Enfin, je tiens à souligner que nous apprécions beaucoup la visite du Monsieur le Président Krivokapic à Bucarest il y a 2 semaines. Une autre délégation a eu l'occasion de participer à un dialogue direct et constructif sur les priorités de l'Assemblée parlementaire de l'OSCE à la fois du Monténégro. Nous sommes convaincus que sous sa direction, la dimension parlementaire de l'OSCE renforcera son rôle actif dans le soutien des efforts de l'OSCE visant à accroître la stabilité et la sécurité. Aussi, au nom de la délégation roumaine, je voudrais saluer la présence à nos réunions de Mme Astrid Thors, le haut commissaire de l'OSCE pour les minorités nationales. Merci de votre attention.
Muchas gracias a usted, señora Nassar. Tiene la palabra la señora Porina de Latvia y a continuación el señor Koskinen, de Finlandia.
Madam Vice President, High Commissioner, dear colleagues, Latvia's goal is to develop as a secure, stable and democratic European country with an integrated society. Latvia's goal is also to become reintegrated into Western Europe, and we consider integration issues from a typically Western European point of view, in which each country's titular nation, its language and culture are the basis for integrating various ethnic groups while respecting the languages and cultures of the ethnic groups insofar as they do not conflict with the basic democratic principles of the state. I want to remind you that the Soviet practice of mixing the ethnic composition of Soviet republics by importing laborers from other republics, resulting in their adopting Russian as a common language and thus in time losing their native language. This policy ensured that the titular nation in each republic was forced to become bilingual, not only in theory but also in practice. The long-term goal was Russian monolingualism in the entire Soviet territory. Also, after the regaining of Latvia's independence, the titular nation Latvians is a minority in Latvia's largest cities. The language of one ethnic minority, the Russian language, is dominant in many places. However, internationally, this situation is not always understood because from the perspective of Western Europe, it is extraordinary and unique for the titular nations of Western countries. Thus, unfortunately, it cannot be recommended to use the Ljubljana guidelines of integration of diverse societies for language policy, namely, one and the same recommendations or instructions cannot be applied in all the OSCE member states. Or as High Commissioner on National Minorities today stated in her speech, and I agree to this, there is no single recipe. Every situation is unique. The guidelines are drafted for all the OSCE member states without taking into consideration their specific situations. The unique situation in Latvia, Estonia and Lithuania has not been taken into account. Therefore, it can be concluded that the guidelines avoid considering the specific situation of the Baltic states and also some other states. Although the guidelines of integration can be used as a reference material in minority education, especially about non-segregated education or one school for all, The insight into the language policy cannot be regarded as scientific. On the contrary, reference to maintaining 2 or more languages in society is non-scientific and even frivolous, and could lead to shaping self-sufficient and segregated societies within one state. Therefore, in order to avoid giving the across-the-board instructions to countries having different linguistic situations, I suggest cooperating with academicians and researchers, as well as relying on their studies in language policy. In this regard, I would like to reiterate the conclusions of the Security Days conference held 1 month before in Vienna. I quote, "In future, a dialogue between the academicians and practitioners of the OSCE should be improved in the OSCE institutions." Thank you very much for your attention.
Gracias a usted, señora Porina. Tiene la palabra el señor Koskinen de Finlandia y a continuación el señor Liepins de Latvia.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to thank both the High Commissioner and the Special Representative on National Minorities for their presentations. Both took up the issue of Roma people in Europe and larger OSCE regions. A lot has been already said about Roma and Sinti minorities in Europe, especially the severe social problems and injustice. I won't repeat, but refer to this discussion here in Budva. In recent years, a lot of efforts have been made in Council of Europe, the Roma. Thank you.
Good questions.
Gracias a usted. Tiene la palabra el señor Liepins de Latvia y se prepara el señor Allison de Canadá.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, High Commissioner, dear colleagues. First of all, I'd like to say thank you very much for the 2 introductory speeches by Mrs. Thors and Mrs. Komic. I think they have set a very good tone for the discussion that we are now having. I would particularly support Mrs. Thors' reference to hate speech. In Latvia, we strongly denounce all hate speech, particularly by politicians, and particularly by politicians who go overseas and then use their hate speech against the country which they then represent. I think it is very important that the historical context is crucial to a proper understanding of the ethnic and minority situation in each country, and that point has been made by a number of people already. So very quickly, I'd like to go through Latvia's experience. First of all, Latvia continued its de jure existence during the Soviet occupation. This is very important. On May 4th, 1990, Latvia declared restoration of its independence with all legal consequences. And this means the body of law, its constitution, civil code, property law, citizenship. So then Latvia at that time faced the reality of a large non-Latvian population residing in Latvia who had migrated there during the Soviet occupation. They lost their Soviet citizenship after the breakup of the Soviet Union. They were not eligible for automatic Latvian citizenship and were granted non-citizen status with all the rights of Latvian citizens apart from voting rights and holding civil service posts and posts linked to national security, I think for very obvious reasons. Non-citizens can now easily acquire Latvian citizenship through naturalization. So far, 140,000 have naturalized, 297,883 have not. Naturalization exams have consistently been eased, and as of October 1, 2013, children of non-citizens and stateless persons can be registered as Latvian citizens simultaneously with their registration of birth. However, research has shown that there is a lack of practical motivation, partly encouraged by various factors, such as Russia offering visa-free travel to Russia for non-citizens, but not Latvian citizens. Also, upon naturalization, previous non-citizens lose their pensions from Russia. And unfortunately, some are encouraged to anticipate automatic citizenship even without any knowledge of the Latvian language. I hope this has given you a good historic perspective of the problems that Latvia is facing in trying to consolidate a community, not integrate, but consolidate a community of people who are loyal to the country and the state of Latvia. Thank you very much for your attention.
Muchas gracias, señor Liepins. Tiene la palabra el señor Allison de Canadá y se prepara la señora Fry, también de Canadá.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Colleagues, as a nation of immigrants, integration and diversity are of particular importance to Canada and to Canadians. In our experience, diversity is an important asset and one that actually strengthens a nation. Respect for diversity does not mean, however, that we abandon the values and norms that act as a unifying force in our society. We take pride, for example, in our history and heritage of a Westminster-style parliamentary governance. In Canada, we are clear that discrimination and violent extremism, as well as harmful practices like forced or early marriage, are unacceptable. Likewise, maintaining freedom of religion and freedom of speech are non-negotiable. We expect every member of society to respect the human rights of others. In this context, I would like to highlight the relationship between tolerance, non-discrimination, and the OSCE's concept of comprehensive security. Next year, 2014, represents the 10th anniversary of the OSCE's Berlin Declaration, which reaffirms the importance of the right to freedom of religion and belief. The Declaration recognizes that anti-Semitism, along with other forms of discrimination and intolerance, threaten security in the OSCE region and beyond. The Declaration also commits participating states to monitor and combating of anti-Semitism and intolerance. But a decade after this declaration was adopted, we hear some of our colleagues, and as a matter of fact, our colleague yesterday from Greece talked about the extremist parties that are gaining support in parts of Europe, including the openly neo-Nazi Golden Dawn Party in Greece. Furthermore, OSCE commitments regarding freedom of religion and belief haven't fully implemented in all OSCE states. As Canada's Ambassador for Religious Freedom, Andrew Bennett, pointed out at the 2013 Human Dimension Implementation Meeting, 1/3 of countries in our region continue to restrict freedom of religion. With Canadian support, however, the OSCE is intensifying its efforts to promote freedom of religion and belief in our region. ODIHR, for example, is currently developing guidelines on recognizing religious communities, and the OSCE panel of experts on freedom of religion and belief has been renewed. You'll recall that in Istanbul, we resolved to strengthen the role of education in combating racism, xenophobia, and other forms of intolerance and discrimination. We also passed a resolution recognizing the importance of promoting freedom of religion or belief in the OSCE region or an area. Colleagues, we've been asking ourselves during this meeting what concrete actions parliamentarians can take to make a difference. Well, I have some ideas. First, we can hold our governments to account when they violate freedom of religion or promote intolerance. Second, we can push our governments to implement existing OSCE commitments and to accept new commitments regarding freedom of religion, intolerance, and discrimination. In particular, you can urge your governments to sign the 2011 Ottawa Protocol on Anti-Semitism, which recommits states to the principles set out in the 2004 OSCE Berlin Declaration. I want to thank you for your attention, and I look forward to further discussions on the relationship between diversity, integration, and the freedom of religion in this Assembly. Thank you very much.
Gracias, señor. Gracias, señor Allison. Señora Fry tiene la palabra y se prepara el señor Kulkugloku de Turquía.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I suppose my colleague just laid out for you the kind of nation that Canada is. We had no choice to become the country we became because we were made up of people from every corner of the globe who have called themselves today Canadians. We started off with the Aboriginal people living in our nation, then came the English and the French, who colonized Canada. And then later on, pre-World War II, many people came from Europe to live and to build Canada. Our nation is based on nation building. We believe that every citizen and every particular Canadian must look at how they build the nation and make the nation a better place. And I think we cannot speak about nation building without talking about a sense of values under rule of law and the ability of a people to feel a sense of loyalty to the place in which they live, such as Canada. Now, after the Second World War, Canada changed because many people came from Europe because of war, seeking the most important thing, seeking equality and seeking freedom. As a result, as Canada grew, it began to open its doors to people from Africa and Asia and every corner of the world, and these people began to suggest that they wanted to be equal to the British and the French, and that they wanted to be seen as citizens, and they wanted to have everyone recognize the nation building that they have done, that the country became great economically and in many ways because of all the immigrants who came there. So we set out something in 1971 called multiculturalism. It was a program. It became legislated into an act in 1985. But what it is based on, and it serves under our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, under Section 2, which actually mandates freedom of religion in the country, under Section 15, which speaks to minority rights and the fact that you cannot discriminate against anyone living in Canada based on their race, their religion, their ethnicity, their language, and any status that they have. So that basically everyone is equal under Section 15. And then, of course, we have the whole Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which takes into consideration and is interpreted under this whole concept of multiculturalism. Today, we see that we still have challenges. Our Aboriginal people still have a problem integrating into our society, but that is our fault and we need to deal with it. And we now see that Quebec, which has always had a strong nationalist policy as a province within our country, is bringing forward its own charter that's going to deny freedom of religious expression based on the garb you wear. And this is something that is concerning us all when we look at our charter. However, someone spoke here about the right of the ability to become a citizen. In Canada, within 3 years of coming to Canada, you can become a citizen. Citizenship confers on you all equalities, but even if you are not a citizen in Canada, you are still under the freedoms and the equality of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I want to tell you one thing. Canada believes in peace. Canada believes in order. And those things are shown based on our legislation, on our programs, and the way we treat each other, integrating into society. We've moved beyond tolerance. We've moved to respect because we have found that people from every corner of the world who now live in Canada, who maintain their language, their culture, and all of the things that made them individuals and groups, we now find that as a trading nation, they go back to their countries, they speak the language, they understand the culture, and they understand the marketplace. And it levers a benefit for us in trade. It also gives us a sense of peace, a sense of order, and security. Thank you very much.
Gracias, señora Frey. Tiene la palabra el señor Kukuloglu de Turquía y se prepara la señora Melenester de Bélgica.
Thank you, Madam Chair, distinguished delegates, dear colleagues. Today is the first day of Eid al-Adha, which is one of the two most important religious holidays of Islam. And on this occasion, I would like to congratulate all of our Muslim members and the Muslim community, Eid Mubarak. I would also like to take this opportunity to congratulate all of our members on their upcoming religious holidays. Almost none of the OSCE nations have an homogeneous and monolithic character in terms of language, religion, ethnic or historical background. The diverse nature of our societies lead us to devise and implement integration policies in order to preserve social stability and cohesion. As an intergovernmental organization, the OSCE has proved to be an effective platform for projecting our common political will to promote equality, combat discrimination, and eliminate prejudices. These are intermediary goals towards reaching our ultimate objective to build a security community free of conflicts and dividing lines. Considerable efforts have been made both by the executive structure, including ODR and the OSCE High Commissioner on National Minorities, as well as the Parliamentary Assembly towards these goals. In this respect, we appreciate the work done by the High Commissioner on National Minorities, including its publication of the Ljubljana Guidelines on the Integration of Diverse Societies last year. However, the situation on the ground today shows that we are still far away from attaining our goals. Unequal access to education, low levels of social acceptance, underachievement in political inclusion are only some of the challenges which we still need to address. Respect for the human and cultural rights of national minorities, along with their inclusion in representative democracy, is the only way to ensure their successful integration. Almost every year in the last decade, we, as parliamentarian representatives of the participating states, have drawn attention to the issue of immigrants living in the OSCE countries. In the 2010 Oslo Declaration, the Parliamentary Assembly considered that migration would continue to be a shaping force for the economies, cultures, and societies of the OSCE participating states, recognized the economic, cultural, political, and social contributions of migrants. In the Kiev Declaration of 2007, our Parliamentary Assembly reaffirmed the existence of fundamental universal human rights that all human beings are entitled to, regardless to their country of origin. As recently as our last gathering in Istanbul, we called on the participating states to intensify their efforts to promote understanding and raise awareness on the causes of intolerance. We should continue to encourage both parliamentary and executive bodies of participating states to make the best use of tools and expertise accumulated in the OSCE institutions. I therefore call on everyone to redouble their efforts aimed at promoting equality, combating discrimination, and addressing intolerance. Thank you for your attention.
Muchas gracias. Tiene la palabra la señora Melenester de Bélgica y se prepara la señora Dade de Albania.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dear colleagues, the last decades our societies have become more diverse. They have become multi-ethnic through different channels of migration, such as labor migration and family reunification. This is not a statement. This is a fact that we have to cope with. Integration, however, is not a fact. It's about policy choices. Here we can make a difference. I would like to take this opportunity to refer to our own situation in my region of Flanders. As a partner in the regional government, my party, N-VA, is in charge of citizen orientation, or, as we say in Dutch, inburgering. I can't find a proper translation, but I will call it citizen orientation. Citizen orientation focuses on three aspects. First of all, learning the national language. In our case, this is Dutch. Without knowledge of the official language, new migrants are unable to adapt to their new home country. All too often, we experience that newcomers, unable to speak Dutch, fail to find a job. But they are also excluded from social activities. More importantly, they can't help their children who attend school. This implies that the problems are passed on to the next generation. Through a policy of citizen orientation, we want to prevent that the second or third generation of former migrants fail to become part of our society. Secondly, citizen orientation emphasizes on the labor market. It helps new migrants to look for a job, to learn how to write a CV, how to make use of their own skills, etc. Thirdly, citizen orientation tries to give a broad overview of the functioning of our country, with a focus on the basic principles such as universal human rights, equality of men and women, gay rights, and so on. This too should enable new migrants respectful of their own tradition to fully participate in our society. Dear colleagues, as you can see, our system of citizen orientation offers a good example of how new migrants can integrate and participate in our society, while at the same time respecting their own tradition. I hope it offers some inspiration to you as well. Thank you.
Muchas gracias por sus palabras. Tiene a continuación la palabra la señora Dade de Albania y se prepara el señor Tusumbekov de Kirguistán.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank all the three ladies for their excellent presentation today. Our region is not what it was 15 years ago as concerns the protection of human rights. Of course, much progress has been done, and still much more remains to be done. The topic under discussion in these 3 days here is what we are really concerned about and what we have committed our efforts and ourselves to resolve certain issues. But we have to be clear that poverty is among one of the threats, especially in our region, in the region which is called, Western Balkans, with all the fact that I don't quite agree with this nomination. At the same time, we've got still weak states and the lack of rule of law. At the same time, we have deficient democracies, and all these, of course, constitute transnational threats, including corruption, which is so much present in our countries, including organized crime and trafficking in persons. Of course, what we lack among ourselves is that we don't have coordination and we don't meet frequently. It's enough that we come to such parliamentary assembly and we talk, and unfortunately, no follow-up comes. So is it enough that parliamentarians should just adopt legislation in order to address these issues, or we should do much more? In the countries with deficient democracies, more than the parliaments are considered as texts of the governments, and this is not the case. We have to make our parliaments really functioning, regardless of the position we have, whether in the ruling majority or whether in opposition. Sometimes it doesn't happen. So we need to push our governments to implement the commitments they have taken vis-à-vis their electorate and the people, but at the same time vis-à-vis international community in our integration process. Talking about trafficking in persons, of course there are new features now acquired by trafficking in persons. Brussels is not any longer destination. The destination is the region, and sometimes even internally. So we need to do much more for this phenomena of modern times, which is the most extreme violation of human rights. Talking about the discrimination of Roma population in Albania, we have the strategy in place, but still remains so much to be done. We have one case, and I want to thank the parliamentarians from Greek parliaments who raised the issue of 500 children kept at a center in Athens, and quite unexpectedly, the 500 were disappeared. And I'm glad that the Greek investigation office has reopened the investigation, and I'm looking forward to having the result of this investigation. Of course, we have to do and to deal with these issues in this area because it's up to OSCE to tackle this, but we have to do much more in our countries and much more in the regions, especially in the regions where we still have these problems with democracy and the rule of law. Thank you very much.
Gracias, señora Dade. Tiene la palabra el señor Tusumbekov de Kirguistán y se prepara la señora Barnett de Alemania.
Уважаемый председатель, дамы и господа, в связи с выводом войск коалиции из Афганистана, Центральная Азия становится центром притяжения внимания всего мира. Становится еще более актуальным вопрос интеграции стран региона. Спрос на интеграцию обуславливает следующие вызовы: укрепление национальной государственности, безопасности и ответа на глобальные вызовы современности. Предпосылки для интеграции региона общие: прошлое, культура, религия, география. Что даст интеграция? Возможность позиционировать себя на мировой арене не просто как совокупность государств, которым по воле истории суждено было стать соседями, а как единый организм, имеющий собственные экономические и геополитические интересы. республики Центральной Азии должны быть не объектом, а субъектом той новой игры, которая в настоящее время складывается вокруг региона в связи с обострением проблем безопасности из-за вывода войск из Афганистана, обеспечения водными и энергетическими ресурсами. При интеграции в перспективе прежде всего необходимо работать в следующих зонах: свободной торговли, развития предпринимательства и инвестиционного сотрудничества, проведение государственной Центральной Азии согласованной таможенной, налоговой и тарифной политики, гармонизации денежно-кредитных и валютных отношений, принятие активных мер по унификации национальных законодательств. Вопросы рационального использования гидроэнергетических ресурсов региона, в том числе создания Международного водно-энергетического консорциума, ключевые региональные проблемы, а также пути выработки совместных мер по укреплению многостороннего сотрудничества в Центральной Азии. Я надеюсь, что эти вопросы займут достойное место в повестках деятельности ОБСЕ и станут предпосылкой для дальнейшего развития интеграции стран Центральной Азии. В конце своего выступления хотелось бы поблагодарить черногорских друзей за высокий уровень организации осенней сессии Парламентской ассамблеи ОБСЕ. Спасибо за внимание.
Señora Barnett tiene la palabra. Se prepara el señor Fitis de Chipre.
Vielen Dank, Frau Vorsitzende. Was ich jetzt von meinen Kolleginnen und Kollegen gehört habe, bringt mich zu dem Schluss, dass wir ja alle wissen, was es zu tun gibt, dass wir alle wissen, was umgesetzt gehört. Und wenn wir das wissen, dann müssten wir bei uns in unseren Ländern eigentlich noch stärker dafür eintreten und dafür arbeiten, dass das auch passiert. Die Frage ist natürlich, ja, warum tun wir es nicht? Wäre es nicht mal an der Zeit, dass wir hier, statt uns gegenseitig zu sagen, was es alles zu tun gibt, wir wissen ja, dass die Wirtschaftskrise, dass Armut in unseren Ländern alles Reaktionen auslöst. Aber wenn wir das alles wissen und dann auch handeln in unseren Ländern, dann wäre es vielleicht an der Zeit, dass wir uns mal im Rahmen von einem Best-Practice-Forum sagen, was wir erreicht haben und voneinander lernen, einfach wie man etwas umsetzt. Ich würde mir natürlich auch wünschen, Deutschland ist ein Land, wir stehen mitten im demografischen Wandel, also wir verlieren Bürger, das heißt, unsere Bevölkerung nimmt dramatisch ab, dass wir in den Migranten, auch in den Minderheiten, das sind Menschen und mit denen haben wir auch einen Schatz, das ist der Rohstoff der Zukunft. Menschen sind unser einziger, wirklicher, positiver Rohstoff der Zukunft. Das, was sie zwischen den Ohren haben, ihren Verstand, der bringt uns voran. Wenn wir uns dessen bewusst sind und sie entsprechend behandeln, nämlich alle auf gleicher Augenhöhe und in sie investieren, mit Schulen, mit Fortbildung, mit Ausbildung, mit guten Berufen, ja, dann lösen wir das Problem. Ich weiß, wir haben nicht genug Geld für das alles in allen Ländern. Ich weiß, wir haben nicht überall die Arbeitsplätze. Aber wenn jedes Land das, was es hier sagt, was es zu tun gibt, auch macht im eigenen Land, dann könnten wir vielleicht uns das nächste Mal treffen und uns sagen, was wir erreicht haben und woran es vielleicht noch mangelt und vielleicht auch gegenseitig lernen, was wir besser machen können. Vielen Dank.
Gracias, señora Bernet. Tiene la palabra el señor Fitti y se prepara la señora Di Pietro de Italia.
Thank you. Minorities existing in various countries are a historical result of various causes. Some of them are wars, internal or external, colonization from one country to another, physical causes and catastrophes, poverty, and some others. The human rights of minorities is a special thing discussed in various discussions, conferences, international discussions and conventions. A lot of conferences, resolutions conventions, declarations, protocols, etc. exist, but the implementation of them is minimum. I have participated in a lot of seminars and conventions as a chairman of the Human Rights Committee and Equal Opportunities Committee of the Cyprus Parliament. My conclusion is that a minimum level of protection of human rights of all these minorities, internal minorities existing inside the country. For instance, people living in prisons for a long period of time is a minority inside the country. And their protection of rights is minimum in various countries because there is an overpopulation of prisons in many, many countries. Ill people in a country living in a hospital for a long period is a minority inside the country. What is the protection of their rights? So the various organizations have some commissioners. United Nations have a commissioner for human rights. European Union has a commissioner for human rights. Council of Europe. Now we have as OSCE a commissioner, Mrs. Astrid, to whom I wish success on her work, and to create a group, an active group, with monitoring every 6 months to each of the 57 countries members of the OSCE. Otherwise, we remain to discussions and to declarations and nothing else. I am disappointed there is no minority, no monitoring every time. And this is not only a matter of the 57 countries members of OSCE. It's a matter of the whole world. What is the result of protecting human rights and the minorities in the members of OSCE, and the poverty exists in Africa? Groups from Africa will continue to come here, and then we start again and again and again. Trafficking. What is the result of all this effort made for eliminating trafficking? Nothing, nothing, nothing. Traffickers find their way to exploit women for sexual exploitation and all the population for labor exploitation.
Le ruego concluya, por favor.
We wish that our commissioner will try harder, and parliaments and the government, especially the governments, should support our commissioner. Thank you.
Gracias, señor Fiti. Tiene la palabra la señora Di Pietro, y para concluir el debate tiene la palabra próximamente el señor Jošev de la Repubblica Jugoslava de Macedonia.
Signor Presidente, colleghi, è un privilegio essere qui a discutere con voi su temi così importanti. In uno scenario di interdipendenza globale, l'OSCE continua a giocare un ruolo fondamentale nel promuovere i valori dell'integrazione e della convivenza pacifica all'interno della società dei suoi Stati membri, valorizzando norme e valori coerenti con lo spirito di inclusione dell'organizzazione in un'ottica di alleanza di civiltà. Siamo testimoni di un grande cambiamento strategico profondamente influenzato dal processo di globalizzazione che riguarda le relazioni tra molteplici attori statuali e non statuali. È un dato di fatto che se anche le relazioni tra Stati rimangono fondamentali, fattori culturali e religiosi legati a entità non statuali e spesso transnazionali continueranno a rappresentare una chiave di volta di rilevanza strategica per la sfera della sicurezza. L'interazione tra diverse etnie, culture e religioni è solo uno degli aspetti dell'interdipendenza globale e ovviamente se da una parte costituisce un'opportunità, dall'altra rappresenta anche una potenziale fonte di pericolosa conflittualità. Facendo tesoro della preziosa esperienza maturata negli anni dall'OSCE, concordo sul fatto che evitare lo scontro fra le diverse tipologie di identità è il primo passo verso l'integrazione in una prospettiva di prevenzione dei conflitti. Le riflessioni da fare sarebbero molteplici. Dato il poco tempo a disposizione, un aspetto in particolare è legato alla duplice dimensione dell'integrazione e della sicurezza, che merita un approfondimento. È necessario dare priorità a tutte quelle attività che contribuiscono ad eliminare le condizioni che favoriscono la diffusione del terrorismo. Come è noto, tutte le forme di intolleranza, pregiudizio e discriminazione razziale o religiosa sono un potentissimo moltiplicatore di forza della narrativa della maggior parte delle organizzazioni terroristiche. E in pieno accordo con quanto sostenuto nella Global Counter-Terrorism Strategy delle Nazioni Unite e dal Consiglio d'Europa, la piena affermazione dei diritti umani e l'integrazione sono strumenti fondamentali per prevenire e combattere il fenomeno del terrorismo transnazionale, fenomeno che purtroppo affligge molti degli Stati membri dell'OSCE. Per quanto riguarda l'Europa, la mancanza di integrazione è certamente uno degli elementi che caratterizzano il terrorismo regionale, in particolare quello legato ai cosiddetti homegrown terrorism. La problematica presenta un notevole profilo di complessità e non esistono soluzioni immediate. Tuttavia questa realtà non ci esime dal tentare di fare passi avanti nella direzione, se non di una soluzione definitiva, quantomeno di un possibile depotenziamento del fenomeno. Come ho fatto presente in altre occasioni istituzionali, è una priorità riuscire a superare l'attuale sistema Dublino, che oltre a rappresentare un chiaro vulnus dei diritti fondamentali dell'individuo, di fatto ostacola il processo di integrazione delle persone che subiscono questo trattamento. In Italia, in sede di esame del disegno di legge di delegazione europea 2013, è stato presentato in Senato un ordine del giorno, poi recepito come raccomandazione dal Governo, che fra i vari punti prevede proprio il superamento del sistema Dublino in una prospettiva di solidarietà fra i Paesi europei nell'affrontare il problema dei rifugiati e degli immigrati. Grazie.
Grazie signora Di Pietro. Signor Georgiev tiene la palabra.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm here in the back. The issue and the topic that we're here talking today is integration of diverse societies. And talking about diverse societies in 21st century, we need to say that all societies in the 21st century are diverse. Even the societies that we think are homogeneous or there is not too much diversity there, oh yes, there is. We need to scratch deeper and we'll see many, many, many differences in every single society. I'm coming from Republic of Macedonia, and there is a lot of diversity in our society. And during all these years, we are learning and we've lived together for centuries way back in the past. We want to continue like that. We're embracing all the documents from the OSCE, from Council of Europe, from European Union, from the United Nations and various international organizations. But talking about integration and tolerance, we should know that we should not just tolerate each other, but we should embrace each other, we should respect each other. We need to wish for the other person what we wish for ourselves. And lastly, Madam Chairwoman, I wanted to mention a couple of things related to religious freedom. Unfortunately, in the 21st century, there are a number of countries where the religious freedom is not respected, even in this area. There are people, religious freedom means a choice to join a religion, a choice to leave a religion, a choice not to belong to a religion. And in a number of countries, this is an issue where institutionally, within the laws, these things are not respected to the highest level. There are a number of organizations that are treating the issue of freedom of religion, and unfortunately, in some areas, this is not on the level where it needs to be. There are sometimes people persecuted. We need to address this issue in the upcoming events. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Let's wish for the other person what we wish for ourselves. and let's our area be an area where we'll have the pursuit of happiness. Thank you.
Gracias a usted. Señora Lindestad, un minuto porque vamos muy mal de tiempo.
Thank you very much. And this is a very important question, and I had heard a lot of good speakers. Hedy Fry was one brilliant speaker, I think. And as I will say, we have also some problems in Sweden, but I think we have to start in another way also in the same time. We have to start with the children. And I used to be a teacher, you know, and a headmaster of a lot of schools. And I have a method to do this, to bring the children together. And when you bring the children together, you have to build a society in another way. You have to live together with the poor and the rich, and they have to go to the same schools. And I used to work in a city with 100,000 inhabitants, and it was made out of living together. So the rich and the poor and everyone went to the same schools. And then when you start to talk about the problems and you play with the children and they are asking for playing with different other children, this will start putting the values into the children. And this is a question not only for today or tomorrow, it's a question for about 10 years or 50 years. So we have to start with the children in the school. And I think that's a conclusion for taking this question away for a long time, but it will take a lot of time, I'm sure. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Asa. Bien, llegamos al final del debate. Me gustaría darle la palabra a la señora Thors y a la señora Comi para que con brevedad nos dieran su opinión sobre el debate que aquí se ha producido, qué más tienen que aportarnos, la diversidad de las situaciones políticas, ideológicas y de los distintos problemas que plantean las migraciones, la integración y la perseverancia de las propias identidades culturales y religiosas y étnicas, se ha puesto de manifiesto en este amplísimo debate, y la necesidad, además, también de la que tomamos nota en la Asamblea Parlamentaria, de hacer un seguimiento de todos aquellos debates, opiniones y decisiones que se toman en nuestras reuniones para que así sean más eficaces. Tiene usted la palabra, señora Thors, en primer lugar, y después la señora Comi. Gracias.
Well, thank you both, Madam President, and thank you, co-speaker here. I will always take home with me your story about the bad and the evil, the good and the evil, the village. That is a very, very good description of what we are talking about. I would also like to use this opportunity when I see you, Vice President Kulkuloglu, who very nicely voiced support for the institution when we met in Vienna a couple of weeks ago. I think there are many good ideas that you have expressed today on how to implement the guidelines. I will take them with me. I will try to keep them in mind when I'm doing my field trips, my visits, meeting with governments, opposition, parliamentarians, civil society in the coming weeks and years. Actually, I'm returning to the region next week for my first field visit. There are many good ideas, but it's important to note that we have many monitoring bodies in the area, but I'm not a monitoring body. I'm a body that is there to discuss and to help and to have diplomacy, how to do the things we are doing. Though I must say that the idea of best practice was also very, very good. I also thank you for the large support, mostly large support that was given to the Ljubljana guidelines, and that many of you find the ideas good. And I also want to point out that certainly the guidelines were established through the work that the predecessor had done and taking into account expertise that we have on rights-based issues, on integration in the academic world. If I may, because there was also a question from one of the parliamentarians from the country I know best, from Finland, Mr. Koskinen, he put concretely how are we going to do what we say we are going to do on the Roma? What is the division of labor between us? I think in view of the upcoming ministerial conference, it's very important that we together monitor the commitments that participating states have done. And I hope, if I may say it, that there is not going to be backsliding on those commitments. I also am very aware that there is a need to a good division of labor. And for instance, when I'm looking at my institution, our strength concerns, for instance, both registration, citizenship, and also access to education, in a way that, for instance, is not the work of the EU, or which has then the resources. But certainly what is most important, I think, that we're not backtracking on the commitment that has been made, and that we are ready for a very, very critical, as we have been here, that also other parts of the OSCE institution is ready for a critical evaluation. And finally, as I said, I'm very much looking forward to having a good dialogue with all of you and with all the participating states. That is the essence of the office.
Gracias, señora Thors. Señora Komi.
Thank you. Quite briefly, and listening very carefully to all of us, I can share with you 2 points and one unsolicited advice. The first point is very clear to me, listening to all of us, is that we share the space and place, but we do not share time and epoch. And not sharing time and epoch, we struggled a lot with implementing and adopting what human charter rights was and is, and what minority rights is. And connected with that, I can share with you an unsolicited advice. A lot of disputes in societies where there are conflicts among minorities of different origin, ethnic, national, religion, cultural, racial, or whatever, is the people are losing their time in discussing what their ancestors did to each other and how their grandfathers and grandmothers and great-uncles, etc. And my advice is to reverse the debate to how our children and our grandchildren will live in that same society. That can give a lot of space for a different perspective in implementing human rights in future. And my second remark is that we tend to increase our likeness to blame game. It's easy. Blame game is lovely. Someone else is to blame for our own difficulties. And while it's in the quadrant where our minorities of national, ethnic, racial, cultural, religion, and origin, it's a minority question. But blame game can spread out very contagiously on the whole of the society. And then you have forces which are not political, but forces which tend to be violent and tend to deny the rights of anyone else but themselves to rule the society on the winds and wings of the blame game. We live the time of changes, and the old Chinese proverb says, when wind of changes start to blow, there are people who build walls, and there are people who build windmills. So that's my proposal to all of us. Let's build windmills for the winds of change that we are all sensing that are blowing around. And thank again the beautiful country of Montenegro and the loving people of Montenegro for hosting us here. Thank you.
Gracias, señora Komi. Hemos concluido la conferencia. Muchas gracias a todos por su participación y vamos a pasar directamente a la clausura de nuestra asamblea. Gracias.